"Take the cloth off," she asked. The rancher did it, and stood in horror. Wild West stories. The wind moved lazily through the tall grasses, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle lowing. In the middle of this endless landscape stood a large, rugged ranch, its wooden fences weathered by years of sun, wind, and storms. This was the home of Jed Thompson, a man known for his strength, honesty, and quiet determination. Life on the ranch had never been easy, but Jed had learned to meet every challenge with patience and a steady hand. Jed was a tall man with broad shoulders, hands calloused from years of hard work, and eyes that seemed to have seen everything the plains could throw at a person. He had been born on this land, just as his father and grandfather had been, and he felt a deep connection to it. The ranch was more than just a place to live, it was a part of him. Each morning he rose before the sun, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and checking the water supply in every corral. Every task, no matter how small, mattered to him. He believed that the land, the animals, and the people who lived on it deserved respect, and he treated them all with care. That day started like any other. Jed was walking along the edge of the ranch, inspecting a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. His horse, Dusty, a loyal companion for many years, walked beside him, snorting softly as the wind ruffled his mane. Jed ran his hand along the splintered wood, shaking his head at the damage. Repairs would take most of the afternoon, but he didn't mind. Work was never something to rush. It was a way of life, a rhythm that gave meaning to the long days and lonely nights. As Jed prepared his tools, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure was moving across the horizon, kicking up a small cloud of dust. At first he thought it might be another rancher or a traveler passing through, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a young woman. She was dressed in simple, worn clothes, and her face was pale and anxious. Her steps were hurried, as if she had been running, and she carried something wrapped in a cloth. Jed felt a pang of curiosity mixed with concern. It was rare for strangers to appear unannounced in this part of the country, and even rarer for them to approach a ranch alone. When she finally reached the fence, she stopped, slightly out of breath. "Excuse me, sir," she called, her voice shaky but determined. I need your help." Jed studied her carefully, noticing the fear in her eyes. "Slow down," he said, his voice calm and steady. "What's wrong?" "Who are you?" "My name is Clara," she replied, clutching the cloth closer to her chest. I found something and I don't know what to do with it. I thought maybe you could help." Jed's curiosity grew. He had seen many strange things in his life: lost travelers, wild animals, storms that seemed to come from nowhere. But there was something different about Clara. She carried an urgency that he couldn't ignore. Without another word, he gestured for her to follow him toward the ranch. As they walked, Clara explained in short, hurried sentences. She had been exploring near her property when she came across something hidden under the dirt and weeds. At first, she had thought it was just an old box, maybe some forgotten item from the past. But the more she looked at it, the more she realized it was unusual, and she didn't feel safe handling it alone. She didn't know if it was valuable, dangerous, or simply strange, but she trusted Jed because of his reputation as a careful, honest man. Jed listened silently, his mind turning over possibilities. He had dealt with many odd discoveries over the years: rusty tools, broken wagons, even old coins. But he had never encountered anything that made his stomach twist with unease before. Something about Clara's voice, the way she held herself, and the way she kept glancing over her shoulder made him feel that whatever lay beneath that cloth was not ordinary. When they reached the ranch, Jed led her to the porch, where the sun cast long shadows across the worn wooden planks. He offered her a seat and some water from a jar he kept on the railing. Clara accepted gratefully, her hands shaking as she held the cloth bundle. The bundle was small but heavy, and it seemed to hum with a strange energy, almost as if it had a life of its own. "Are you sure you want me to see it?" Jed asked cautiously, glancing at her. "Yes," Clara said firmly, though her voice quivered. "I need to know what it is." "I can't do this alone." Jed nodded, taking a deep breath. He knew that whatever was in that bundle could change everything, not just for Clara, but for both of them. He had learned in his long life on the plains that curiosity and caution must go hand in hand. One wrong move could lead to disaster, yet sometimes ignoring a mystery only made it worse. He set his jaw, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. Slowly, Jed reached for the cloth, his hand steady despite the tension in the air. Clara held her breath as he began to lift it, revealing a small, weathered object underneath. The sun glinted off its surface, catching the intricate patterns carved into the material. Jed's eyes widened slightly. It was not just an old box or a forgotten trinket. It was something that seemed almost alive with history. The carvings were strange, intricate, and unlike anything he had seen before. Clara stepped back, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Do you know what it is?" she asked softly. Jed shook his head. "I've seen a lot in my life, Clara, but nothing quite like this. Whatever it is, it's old, very old, and it's been hidden for a reason." The wind picked up, rustling the grasses and carrying with it a faint, eerie sound like a whisper from the past. Jed felt a shiver run down his spine. For a moment, the wide-open plains seemed to shrink, closing in around them with the weight of unknown secrets. The ranch, usually a place of safety and routine, now felt like the threshold to a story that had waited decades to be uncovered. Clara's hands trembled as she reached out again for the bundle. Jed could see the trust in her eyes, the hope that he would help her face whatever lay beneath the cloth. He understood that this moment would change both of their lives. They were no longer just a rancher and a stranger. They were two people on the edge of a discovery that could reshape their understanding of the past, of the land, and of themselves. Jed took one last deep breath and carefully lifted the cloth completely. What lay beneath was more than either of them could have imagined, and the air seemed to grow heavier with anticipation. In that quiet moment, with the sun beating down and the wind whispering through the grasses, Jed realized that his life on the ranch, as steady and predictable as it had seemed, was about to change forever. Jed's hands trembled slightly as he held the small, weathered box that Clara had found. The intricate carvings on its surface caught the sunlight, casting tiny, strange shadows across the wooden porch. He had seen old boxes before, old trunks that held forgotten letters or family keepsakes, but this one felt different. There was a weight to it, not just physically but almost as if it carried a story, a secret, or even a warning. Clara stood beside him, her eyes wide, waiting, her hands still clutching the cloth she had wrapped it in. "Jed, please," Clara whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind that moved lazily through the ranch. "I need to know what's inside. I can't sleep thinking about it." Jed nodded slowly. He understood. Curiosity had always been a part of life in the West. He had spent countless hours exploring caves, abandoned homesteads, and dusty trails, always looking for answers, always wanting to uncover hidden truths. He had learned to respect the unknown, to approach it with patience and caution, but he had also learned that some secrets could not remain buried forever. He set the box carefully on the porch rail and knelt down to examine it. The wood was darkened with age, and the carvings were unlike anything he had seen on the ranch before. They weren't just decorative. They seemed almost like symbols, etched carefully by someone who had spent a great deal of time and thought on them. Jed ran his fingers lightly across the surface, feeling the tiny grooves and the smoothness of the worn edges. Every detail seemed deliberate, intentional. Clara leaned closer, her curiosity mixed with fear. "Do you think it's dangerous?" she asked. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was also a spark of determination. I mean, could it be something people wanted hidden? Jed considered this carefully. Could be, he said slowly. Sometimes, people hide things not because they're dangerous, but because they're precious or private. But other times, well, other times they're trying to cover something they don't want anyone to find. His eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip behind distant hills. The plains seemed quieter now, the usual sounds of birds and insects hushed as if the land itself were holding its breath. Clara shivered and nodded. I feel like someone needs to know what's inside, but I don't know how to do it safely. Jed sighed, thinking. He had faced danger many times on the ranch, storms, runaway cattle, even outlaws, but nothing had ever made him feel the kind of anticipation and fear he felt now. He knew that whatever was in the box had been hidden for a reason, and revealing it might stir up trouble, but he also knew that secrets like this had a way of refusing to stay hidden. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "We'll take a look, together. We'll be careful. Whatever it is, we'll handle it." Clara nodded, relief washing over her face. Jed reached down and gently lifted the lid of the box. A faint, musty smell rose from inside, carrying the scent of earth and age. He peered inside and saw something that made his heart skip a beat. The box was filled with carefully wrapped items, small bundles tied with frayed strings, letters yellowed with age, and some fragments of old wood and cloth. At first glance, it looked like the possessions of someone long gone, perhaps left behind in a hurry or hidden for safekeeping. Jed carefully lifted the first bundle, untying the string slowly. Inside were small, personal items, a faded photograph of a family, a leather pouch that once might have held coins, and a tiny notebook filled with delicate handwriting. Jed studied the words, recognizing names and dates that seemed familiar yet distant. The notebook contained notes about daily life on a ranch decades ago, about hard work, simple pleasures and struggles that mirrored those he faced every day. This belonged to someone a long time ago, Jed said softly, almost to himself. Someone who cared about this land and these people. Clara leaned closer, examining the items with awe. "It's like a piece of history," she said, her voice barely audible. "Someone kept all this hidden, maybe to protect it, or maybe because they were afraid." Jed nodded, thinking. Fear and protection often walked hand in hand, especially in these parts. The West was a beautiful, wild land, but it was also harsh, unforgiving, and sometimes cruel. People did things to survive, to protect what mattered most, and sometimes those things were kept secret for generations. He carefully lifted another bundle. This one contained letters, tied neatly with a ribbon. He began reading, and his eyebrows furrowed as he realized the letters told a story, one of hardship, betrayal, and loss. "They were hiding a lot more than just these items," Jed murmured. "They were hiding a story, something important that someone didn't want anyone to know." Clara's hands trembled as she took a closer look. "Do you think someone could still be affected by this? By what's written here?" Jed hesitated. It was possible. People in the past made choices that rippled through generations. Sometimes the truth of those choices could still affect families today. He realized that this box, carefully hidden for decades, could change how people in the area understood their history. It could bring answers, closure, or even stir up old wounds that had been buried long ago. As they examined the contents further, Jed noticed something peculiar. Some of the items weren't just old possessions, they were clues. There were symbols scratched into the wooden box, patterns that matched sketches in the notebook, and references in the letters to a place nearby on the plains. It became clear that the box wasn't just a collection of random items. It was a puzzle, a story waiting to be pieced together. Whoever had hidden it had done so deliberately, wanting someone careful enough to find it and understand its meaning. Jed leaned back, taking a deep breath. The sun was lower now, casting golden light across the ranch. Dusty the horse nickered softly from the corral, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the hills. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, almost normal, but Jed knew it was. They had opened something that had been meant to remain hidden, and that meant their lives had just become more complicated. "We need to be smart about this," Jed said, looking at Clara. "We can't just go running to town with these items. Whoever hid them, they might not want anyone to know they exist. We need to figure out the story, understand it, before we involve anyone else." Clara nodded, determination replacing her fear. "I want to help," she said firmly. "I've already found it. I can't just walk away now." Jed smiled faintly, appreciating her courage. "Good. We'll do it together, step by step. We'll uncover the truth, but carefully. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. That's how you stay safe out here, and how you make sense of things that have been hidden for years." They spent the rest of the afternoon carefully going through each bundle, making notes and comparing the items. Every new discovery brought a mixture of excitement and unease. Some letters told of simple farm life and family celebrations, while others hinted at disputes and losses. One particularly fragile letter mentioned a disagreement that had turned violent, though details were vague. Jed felt a chill run down his spine. The box contained more than just memories. It contained secrets that someone had wanted to disappear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains in shades of orange and purple, Jed and Clara sat in silence for a few moments. They had uncovered part of a story, but they both knew there was more to come. The box, the letters, the photographs, they were just the beginning. What lay ahead could change their understanding of the land, the people, and the past in ways they could not yet imagine. Finally, Jed closed the box carefully, tying it again with the string to keep it secure. He looked at Clara and nodded. "We'll continue tomorrow. The sun's gone down and it's not safe to go any further in the dark. But don't worry, we'll find out what this all means. Together." Clara nodded, a mix of relief and anticipation on her face. She knew this was only the start of something much bigger than herself, bigger than the ranch, even bigger than the quiet town nearby. And Jed, experienced and steady, knew that life on the ranch had just taken a turn into a mystery he would not soon forget. As they walked back toward the main house, the wind whispered through the plains, carrying the faint rustle of grass and the promise of secrets waiting to be revealed. The Wild West, with all its beauty and danger, had shown them that even in the quietest corners, history never truly stayed buried. The next morning, the sun rose over the sprawling plains, casting a warm, golden glow across Jed Thompson's ranch. The air was crisp, and the smell of dew on the grass mixed with the faint scent of cattle from the pens. Jed had been awake for hours, moving quietly through the ranch, checking fences and making sure the livestock were fed and watered. But his mind was not on the usual chores. The box, the letters, and the mysterious bundles from yesterday weighed heavily on him. He could not shake the feeling that whatever they had uncovered was bigger than either he or Clara realized. Clara arrived shortly after sunrise, her face determined, yet pale with the worry that had kept her awake all night. She carried a notebook of her own, filled with her thoughts and questions, and a small bag with gloves, brushes, and other tools they might need to handle the items safely. She had not expected to be part of anything so serious when she set out for her property, but now she knew that her life had changed. Jed greeted her with a nod, acknowledging her courage without needing to say anything more. They had work to do, and both understood the unspoken trust that had formed between them. They returned to the porch, where the box had been safely kept overnight. Jed gently lifted the lid again, the hinges creaking slightly as if protesting the disturbance. The smell of aged paper and earth rose from the box, reminding them that they were dealing with something ancient, something long hidden. They began to examine the items once more, this time with a careful strategy. Jed sorted the bundles by type, letters in one pile, personal belongings in another, and small artifacts in a third. Clara carefully took notes, documenting dates, names, and symbols, while Jed studied the carvings on the box itself, tracing each line with his finger, trying to understand their meaning. As they went through the letters, Jed noticed something that made him pause. One of the letters, written in a hurried hand and stained with age, mentioned a location near the edge of a small grove on the outskirts of the nearby hills. The writer spoke of hiding something there, fearing it would be discovered by someone who should not see it. The words were careful, almost like a warning. Jed's stomach tightened. He had spent decades exploring these lands and knew every hill, every creek, and every grove. If the letter's directions were correct, the hiding place was nearby, possibly a secret that had been undisturbed for years. Clara leaned over his shoulder, peering at the letter. "Do you think it's still there?" she asked, her voice low. "After all this time?" Jed considered for a moment. "Could be," he said. "People can hide things for a very long time, especially out here. The land doesn't change much, but if it's something important, we need to be very careful." They decided to investigate the grove later in the day, once the sun was higher and the shadows shorter. In the meantime, they continued to explore the contents of the box. Jed carefully unfolded a piece of cloth and found what appeared to be fragments of a journal. The pages were brittle, almost falling apart, but the handwriting was clear enough to read. It described the daily life of someone who had lived on these plains long ago, detailing their struggles, their hopes, and most disturbingly, their fears. Jed read aloud softly, his voice carrying over the quiet ranch. The journal mentioned disputes with neighbors, the loss of livestock, and a series of events that had led to fear for one's safety. The writer hinted at secret meetings, hidden items, and the need to conceal certain truths. Each word seemed to thicken the air around them, turning the sunny morning into something tense, almost ominous. Clara's eyes widened with each sentence, and she found herself gripping the edge of the porch as if holding on to reality itself. "There's more to this than I thought," Jed murmured, his brow furrowed. "These weren't just random items left behind. Someone wanted to make sure this story was hidden, and now we're the ones who have found it." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. "Do you think it's dangerous?" Jed shook his head slowly. "Not in the way you might think, but some secrets, they can hurt people in ways you don't expect. They can change the way you see your own history, your own town, even the people around you." The morning passed slowly, each moment filled with anticipation and unease. By late afternoon, the sun was high in the sky, and Jed and Clara felt ready to follow the clues from the letters to the grove. They packed the box carefully, along with the journal, photographs, and a few other key items. Jed grabbed his wide-brimmed hat, adjusted his boots, and led the way, Dusty following closely behind. Clara walked beside him, clutching the notebook that had become her guide, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of discovery. As they approached the grove, the air seemed to change. The usual sounds of birds and insects faded, replaced by a quiet that felt almost unnatural. The trees grew thicker here, casting long shadows across the ground, and the tall grasses whispered with the wind. Jed slowed his pace, scanning the area carefully. Every step could reveal something important, but it could also disturb something that was better left alone. Clara followed closely, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to imagine what they might find. They reached a small clearing in the center of the grove, where the ground was uneven and covered in dry leaves. Jed knelt down, brushing aside the leaves and dirt carefully, following the directions from the letter. His fingers trembled slightly as he uncovered the edge of a wooden box buried in the soil. It was smaller than the one on the porch, and its wood was dark with age. Jed looked up at Clara and she nodded, silently urging him to continue. With deliberate care, Jed lifted the box from the ground, brushing away the remaining dirt. The weight of it surprised him. It was heavier than it appeared. The carvings on the box matched those of the first one, intricate and mysterious, telling a story that neither of them could fully understand yet. Jed's chest tightened. Whatever lay inside this box, it had been hidden for a reason, and the anticipation of discovering it made the air feel thick and heavy around them. Clara held her breath as Jed opened the lid slowly. Inside were more letters, personal items, and what appeared to be remnants of something fragile and broken. As Jed carefully examined the contents, his expression changed. His eyes widened, and a shiver ran down his spine. The items told a story of loss, fear, and secrecy. There were notes about people who had disappeared, belongings of someone who had vanished without a trace, and a small, delicate object that seemed out of place, a symbol of something long forgotten, yet significant. Jed leaned back, his hand hovering over the box. "Clara, this isn't just a story of the past," he said quietly. This is evidence. Something happened here that someone didn't want anyone to know, and now we've found it." Clara's hands shook as she reached for the notebook. "What do we do?" she whispered. "Do we take it to the sheriff?" Jed shook his head. "Not yet. We need to understand it first. Whoever hid this, they didn't do it lightly. There's a reason it was buried. If we rush, we could make mistakes and the truth could be lost, or worse, misinterpreted." They spent hours in the grove, carefully examining each letter and artifact, trying to piece together the story. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, and the wind picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that seemed almost like a warning. Jed felt a sense of unease he had never experienced before. This was no ordinary discovery. It was a window into a past filled with secrets, fear, and unresolved events. By the time they returned to the ranch, both Jed and Clara were exhausted but determined. They carried the boxes carefully, knowing that what they held could change everything they thought they knew about the land and its history. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the plains glowing softly in the evening light. Dusty nickered, sensing the tension in the air. Jed placed the boxes on the porch, glancing at Clara. "We've uncovered part of the story," he said quietly, "but the full truth, the full horror, we haven't seen it yet." Clara nodded, her determination firm despite the unease. "Then we'll face it together," she said, "no matter what we find." Jed looked out across the plains, the wind brushing against his face. The Wild West had always been a place of adventure, danger, and mystery, but he had never imagined that life on his quiet ranch would lead him to a secret buried for decades, a secret that could shake the town, the land, and the people they thought they knew. The discovery of the boxes was only the beginning, and both Jed and Clara knew that the days ahead would bring more revelations, more questions, and perhaps even more fear than they had yet imagined. The sun finally set, casting the ranch in shadows. The wind carried a strange, almost whispering sound through the tall grasses. Jed and Clara sat silently on the porch, the boxes between them, knowing that the night would be long, filled with thoughts of what they had uncovered and what still remained hidden. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. The past had been awakened, and it would not rest quietly again. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the vast Wild West plains, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Jed Thompson was awake before the first rays hit the ranch, his mind still occupied by the discovery from the day before. The boxes, the letters, and the fragments of a story long hidden had unsettled him in a way that nothing had before. He had faced storms, wild animals, and even the occasional band of outlaws, yet this mystery carried a weight that pressed on his chest, making each breath feel heavier than usual. Clara arrived shortly after sunrise, her eyes tired but alert. The night had been long for her as well. She had hardly slept, her thoughts racing through every detail of the letters and the artifacts they had uncovered. Despite her exhaustion, there was a determination in her expression. Whatever secrets the past held, she was determined to see them revealed to understand the full story, no matter how frightening it might be. Jed greeted her with a quiet nod. "Ready?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of tension that Clara recognized. They both knew that today would be different. Yesterday, they had discovered the boxes and the first hints of a hidden past. Today, they would uncover the story behind it, a story that might be darker and more complicated than they could imagine. Clara nodded, clutching her notebook and gloves tightly. Together, they set off toward the grove once more, Dusty following quietly behind. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, but there was an unusual stillness in the air. The usual sounds of birds and insects seemed muted, as if the land itself were holding its breath, aware that secrets buried for decades were about to be unearthed. When they reached the grove, Jed knelt down carefully, brushing aside leaves and dirt to reveal the box they had found the day before. He took his time, handling it with extreme care. Clara stood beside him, her heart pounding with anticipation. She could feel the tension in Jed's movements, the seriousness in his eyes, and it made her feel both anxious and excited. They had crossed the threshold from curiosity into discovery, and there was no turning back now. Jed opened the box slowly, the hinges creaking softly in the quiet grove. Inside were letters, personal belongings, and fragments of objects that hinted at stories of people long gone. But as Jed examined the items more closely, he realized that this box contained not just memories, but evidence of events that had been deliberately hidden. There were letters that mentioned disputes between neighbors, financial troubles, and fears for personal safety. There were notes about people who had disappeared, references to arguments that had turned bitter, and clues that suggested someone had gone to great lengths to hide the truth. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a letter, carefully unfolding it. The handwriting was hurried, and the edges of the paper were worn with age, but the words were clear enough to read. The letter spoke of betrayal, fear, and desperation. Someone had been hiding something important, something that could change the way people in the town remembered the past. Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she read the words aloud, her voice breaking slightly. Jed leaned in, reading over her shoulder. His eyes narrowed as he pieced together the story. The letters, the artifacts, and the carvings on the box were all connected. They told of a series of events that had unfolded decades ago, involving people who had been trusted by the community, but who had secretly acted in ways that were cruel and dishonest. The full picture was beginning to emerge, and it was far darker than either Jed or Clara had expected. "This isn't just about hidden belongings," Jed murmured. "This is about things that were done, things that people didn't want anyone to know. And some of those people, they may still be alive or their families might still be here, carrying the secrets with them." Clara looked up, fear and determination mixed in her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked. "Do we go to the sheriff? Do we tell anyone?" Jed shook his head slowly. "Not yet. We need to understand the story first. If we rush, we could misinterpret what's here and the truth might get twisted. We need to follow the clues carefully, piece everything together, and make sure we know what we're dealing with before involving anyone else." Together, they began to sort through the letters and artifacts, matching names, dates, and events. Each discovery added a layer to the story, revealing more about the people involved and the secrets they had kept. Jed noticed that some of the items seemed deliberately placed, almost like a trail left for someone careful enough to find it. The carvings on the box matched symbols mentioned in the letters, and fragments of objects suggested locations on the ranch and nearby lands where other pieces of the puzzle might be hidden. Hours passed as they worked, the sun climbing higher in the sky and casting dappled shadows through the trees. Clara carefully documented everything, making detailed notes about each item and its possible significance. Jed studied the carvings and letters, trying to understand the intentions of the person who had hidden the boxes. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that this was not just a story of the past. It was a story that had the power to affect the present, a story that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. At one point, Jed paused and held up a small fragment of paper that had been tucked inside a bundle. The handwriting was almost illegible, but the words suggested a betrayal that had led to serious consequences. Jed's jaw tightened as he read aloud, his voice low and steady. Clara listened, her face pale, as the implications became clear. The past had not been kind to everyone, and some of the actions described in the letters had caused pain and fear that rippled through the years. "We're dealing with more than just hidden items," Jed said quietly. "We're dealing with decisions, mistakes, maybe even crimes that someone wanted to bury, and now they're coming to light." Clara swallowed hard, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. "Do you think people will be angry?" she asked. "Or scared?" Jed nodded. "Could be both, but truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's painful, but hiding it doesn't make it disappear. What we're doing, we're giving people a chance to understand, to face the past honestly." As the afternoon wore on, they discovered a particularly troubling set of letters and small objects that hinted at someone having disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The evidence suggested that someone had tried to cover it up, leaving only clues for someone careful enough to piece the story together. Jed felt a shiver run down his spine. The horror wasn't in ghosts or monsters. It was in the real-life consequences of human actions, the secrets that had festered in silence for decades. Clara reached for another bundle, and her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were personal belongings, worn and fragile, that belonged to the missing person mentioned in the letters. A small locket, a handkerchief, and a few other items gave a haunting glimpse into the life that had been interrupted. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, imagining the fear and confusion of someone who had vanished without explanation. Jed placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, understanding her emotions. They were uncovering a human story, filled with sorrow, fear, and consequences that had lasted far longer than anyone could have imagined. By the time the sun began to set, painting the plains in orange and purple, Jed and Clara had pieced together most of the story. They had discovered the betrayal, the hidden items, and the clues that revealed a carefully concealed past. Yet there were still questions, mysteries that remained unanswered. They realized that the full truth would require careful thought, and perhaps the involvement of people who could help make sense of it without causing harm. Jed looked out across the plains, the wind rustling the grass softly. "This is bigger than I thought," he said quietly. "The past is never really gone. It waits, sometimes for decades, for someone to uncover it, and now that someone is us." Clara nodded, feeling a mix of fear, awe, and determination. "We have to do the right thing," she said softly, "no matter how hard it is." Jed smiled faintly. "That's the only way to face it, carefully, patiently, and with respect for what happened. The truth can be harsh, but it's the only thing that lasts." As night fell over the ranch, the stars twinkling brightly above the vast plains, Jed and Clara sat quietly on the porch, reflecting on what they had uncovered. The boxes, the letters, and the hidden artifacts had revealed a story of fear, betrayal, and mystery that had been buried for decades. They knew that the days ahead would require courage, careful thought, and patience. But for the first time, they felt that they were on the right path to uncovering the full truth. The Wild West, with its vast open plains, harsh weather, and endless sky, had shown them that the past was never truly gone. It lingered, waiting for the right moment, the right people, to bring it into the light. And Jed and Clara had taken that first step, opening the door to a story that would change everything they thought they knew about the land, the town, and the people who had lived there before them. The morning air was crisp and cool on Jed Thompson's ranch, carrying with it the fresh scent of earth and grass. The sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. For the first time in days, Jed felt a quiet sense of resolve. The discovery of the hidden boxes, letters, and artifacts had changed everything. The past had revealed its secrets, and now it was time to face the consequences and bring the story to light. Clara arrived shortly after sunrise, her eyes bright with determination, but also carrying the weariness of several sleepless nights. The revelations they had uncovered had weighed heavily on her, yet she felt an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. She carried her notebook carefully, filled with meticulous notes from their investigation, along with the artifacts and letters they had carefully preserved. Today they would take the next step, sharing the truth responsibly so that the story buried for decades could finally be understood. Jed met her at the porch, a calm but serious look on his face. "Today is the day," he said quietly. "We've done the work, we've pieced together the story, and now it's time to let others see it too. But we have to be careful. This isn't just history, it's real lives, real families, and some people may still be affected by what we found." Clara nodded. "I understand. We'll do it carefully, step by step. No rushing, no assumptions, just the truth." Jed carefully packed the boxes, ensuring that each item was secure. The letters, photographs, and small personal artifacts were all tied and wrapped with care. Clara double-checked her notes, making sure every detail was clear and accurate. They would need these records to explain the story fully, to provide evidence that what they had found was genuine and meaningful. Once everything was ready, they set off toward the town, walking quietly through the vast plains. Dusty followed alongside them, his hooves stirring up small clouds of dust that glimmered in the morning sunlight. The ranch, which had seemed so peaceful and ordinary, now felt different. The weight of the past hung in the air, and Jed could feel it pressing gently, reminding him that the story they carried was significant and delicate. When they arrived at the sheriff's office, the town was quiet, most people still busy with the routines of early morning. Jed and Clara entered, carrying the boxes and notes carefully. Sheriff Matthews, a seasoned man with years of experience in the Wild West, looked up from his desk in surprise. He was a man who had seen many things, from cattle rustling to lost travelers, but there was a seriousness in Jed's expression that immediately caught his attention. "Sheriff," Jed said calmly, "we found something hidden for a long time. We believe it's important and it needs to be documented and understood carefully." Sheriff Matthews raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening," he said, motioning for them to place the boxes on the desk. Clara began explaining the discovery, carefully describing how she had found the first box, what they had uncovered inside, and how the letters and artifacts connected to a story of people who had lived in the area decades ago. She detailed the clues from the carvings, the notes, and the hidden items, showing how they pieced together a history that had been deliberately concealed. Jed added his perspective, explaining the context of the ranch, the grove where they had found the second box, and the importance of understanding the story fully before taking any action. The sheriff listened intently, nodding occasionally, and asking questions to clarify details. As the narrative unfolded, it became clear that they had uncovered not just hidden belongings, but a story of fear, secrecy, and decisions that had rippled through the years. "This is remarkable," Sheriff Matthews said finally, after examining the boxes and letters. "It's rare to find something like this intact. Decades of history, carefully preserved. It could change the way people understand the past. And you too, you've done an extraordinary job." Jed nodded. "We just want to make sure it's handled properly. People deserve to know the truth, but it needs to be presented carefully, with respect for those involved and their families." The sheriff agreed. He made arrangements to document everything officially, to create a record that would preserve the story accurately and responsibly. They photographed the letters and artifacts, carefully logged each item, and ensured that the notes Clara had made were included in the official record. The town historian was brought in as well, someone who could contextualize the story within the broader history of the region. As the day progressed, news of the discovery began to spread quietly through the town. People were curious, some surprised and others concerned. Jed and Clara remained focused on their work, guiding the process with care and ensuring that the story was told accurately. It was a delicate balance, honoring the past while revealing the truth, providing clarity without causing unnecessary alarm. By late afternoon, the process was nearly complete. The letters and artifacts were safely stored in the sheriff's office, and copies of Clara's notes had been made for the town archives. The story of the past was now documented and preserved, ready to be understood by anyone who wished to learn from it. Jed felt a sense of relief, knowing that the secrets they had uncovered would no longer remain hidden, but would instead contribute to a fuller understanding of the town's history and the people who had lived there. Clara looked at the boxes one last time, a mixture of awe and solemnity in her eyes. "It feels strange," she said softly, "like we've been holding someone else's story for so long, and now it's finally out in the open." Jed placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's the way it should be," he said. "The past belongs to everyone. Hiding it doesn't help anyone, but uncovering it carefully, that gives people a chance to learn, to understand, and maybe even to heal." As the sun began to set over the plains, casting a warm orange glow across the town, Jed and Clara walked back toward the ranch. The wind whispered softly through the grass, carrying a sense of closure and renewal. Dusty trotted beside them, his movements calm and steady, reflecting the sense of peace that had settled over the land. Back at the ranch, Jed took a moment to look out across the plains, feeling the vastness of the land and the weight of what they had accomplished. The boxes, the letters, and the artifacts had revealed a story that was both haunting and inspiring. It was a reminder that the past, no matter how hidden or difficult, always has a way of resurfacing. And when it does, it offers lessons, insights, and opportunities for understanding. Clara stood beside him, her notebook safely tucked under her arm. She looked out at the horizon, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown together, and in doing so they had uncovered a story that would be remembered for generations. "Jed," she said quietly, "thank you for trusting me, for helping me do this the right way." Jed smiled, his eyes reflecting both the weight of the past and the hope for the future. "It wasn't just me," he said. "You had the courage to find it and the determination to see it through. We did it together. That's what matters." The evening settled over the ranch, and the stars began to appear in the sky, shining brightly above the endless plains. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the quiet promise that the past had been respected and the truth had been revealed. Jed and Clara sat quietly on the porch, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken. The Wild West, with its endless horizons, harsh beauty, and hidden stories, had taught them that life was not just about survival, but about understanding, courage, and the responsibility to face the truth, no matter how difficult. In the days that followed, the town began to come to terms with the story that had been uncovered. Families learned of their ancestors' struggles and choices, gaining insight into events that had shaped their community. The letters and artifacts became part of the town's history, preserved in the archives for future generations to study and learn from. Jed and Clara had played a crucial role in bringing these secrets to light, and their efforts were quietly respected by those who understood the significance of what they had accomplished. For Jed, life on the ranch returned to a familiar rhythm, but he carried a new understanding of the land and its history. He continued his daily work with the cattle and the fences, but he also reflected on the stories that lay hidden beneath the soil, waiting for someone to uncover them. He knew now that history was not just something written in books. It was alive in the land, in the objects left behind, and in the lives of the people who had come before. Clara, too, felt a deep connection to the ranch and the land. She decided to stay in the town, helping preserve its history and sharing the story of the boxes with others who wanted to understand the past. She had faced her fears, uncovered hidden truths, and found a sense of purpose that she had not known before. As the sun set over the plains, Jed and Clara stood together, looking out at the horizon. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the stories of the past and the promise of the future. They had faced the unknown, uncovered the secrets of decades, and brought the truth to light. The Wild West had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately taught them the importance of courage, patience, and integrity. In the end, the boxes and the letters were no longer just hidden objects. They were symbols of history, memory, and the enduring human spirit. And Jed and Clara, having faced the mystery together, knew that they had done something meaningful, something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. The plains stretched endlessly before them, vast and timeless, holding countless stories yet to be discovered. But for now, the past had been revealed, the truth had been honored, and life, though forever changed, could continue with a sense of understanding, respect, and hope.